Hello everyone, Amy R here with Prairie Paper and Ink. So for today's cards, I wanted to use Simon Says Stamp's Bursting Hearts stencil. It's been sold out for a while, so I just kind of held off. I don't have control over stock with, companies, but when I'm able to somewhat plan ahead, I can try and wait till something comes back in stock. So this did. So I pulled out my binder that I keep my blending foams for my Distress Oxide inks. I've already done an in-depth video explaining this. I still love this. The only thing I would change, which I still might do down the road, is to put my labels in alphabetical order. It just makes it so much easier to find the blending foam I'm looking for. And I still really like this. I don't have the space or enough handles to have to keep the foams on the handles for each color. And I just still prefer the blending foams for specifically oxide inks. I just find I get the best results when the foams are, really saturated with the ink. You just get smoother results. Everything works. So anyway, I'll have a link in the upper corner to that video if anyone's interested. So I pulled out the Distress Oxide colors I wanted to use and my Wendy Vecchi Make Art station here. That's all magnetic. And then the Bursting Hearts stencil, which is huge because this is a full 8.5 by 11 sheet of Simon's 120 pound cardstock. This stencil is like 9 by 12 basically. So yeah, it is large and fun. If you're a scrapbooker, this would be a really fun one. Obviously, I'm not a scrapbooker. I just like making cards. So what I decided to do, I was like, if I just stencil the entire piece of cardstock with this, I can get 4 cards out of it. So that's what I did. So I put the stencil over the cardstock and then I just started blending on the colors. No rhyme or reason to it. Somewhat rainbow colors in a sense, but I'm not going in any rainbow order. Since I do plan on cutting this into quarters, I basically wanted a little bit of each color, in each quarter of cardstock. So I just kind of went around, didn't worry about it too much. The only thing I was somewhat careful about was not blending like the cracked pistachio and the shaded lilac, like those sorts of colors, because, green and purple basically make mud. So again, it depends on how much you do. If you're using kind of a lighter hand and that, you can pretty much make any color combination work. It's just if you start going like back and forth and really blending into each other, that's when you'll start getting that, that grayish, brownish sort of thing. And that's what I mean when I'm talking about mud. So tiny little bit isn't a big deal, but yeah, if you're struggling, that's usually the reason why, is because just certain colors just don't blend nicely together. So I went with very soft sort of pastel-y colors. Usually I'm going more, bright and rainbowy. But for once I was like, I'm going to tone it down a bit. Plus I hadn't used cracked pistachio in a while and I really love this color. So I did my blending, removed the stencil, and I have this fun multicolor heart background. And now I'm going to cut it into quarters. So I'm going to cut it in half and then cut each piece in half again. So I end up with 4 pieces that are 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. For now, I will cut these down again a little bit later. So technically 4 card fronts. The only thing I ended up deciding to do is that one piece that was the upper left corner of the cardstock. You can see it doesn't have as many hearts on it and I wanted more. So I'm just going to place the stencil the way I want it just to add a few more hearts. And then once I'm happy with where it's placed, I'm going to use a little bit of Post-it tape, and then I end up using, just because I had the Post-it tape sitting from another project, because I'll just reuse the same pieces over and over again until they're like completely used up. So I put those in place, and then I just took a little bit of painter's tape just to mask off the hearts that I didn't want to get any ink on. And then I'm just going to quickly blend right over those little smaller hearts just to kind of finish off this one piece of cardstock. So exact same thing. Now, as always, you could leave it here, but I find with something like this, it makes a lot more sense to just add a little bit of something. Something that would really work, not with this one piece, but after I had blended on all those colors, before removing the stencil from the full piece of cardstock, like putting some glitter paste over it would have been gorgeous. Anything like that, really. But what I decided to do was splatter. I haven't done splatter in a bit. I was going through withdrawals. So pulled out my splat box here, and I'm just going to start like mushing the edges of some of these oxide ink pads just right onto the station, because the station base, because it's non-porous, so it's good to go. And then I just grabbed a little paintbrush that I had a little bit of water with, mixed that into the ink, and then I'm just lightly splattering it onto these backgrounds. And I'm only going to use 3 of the inks for splatter, which for me was actually reining it in a bit, because normally I would use like every single color, you know, have splatter of all the colors. But the 3 was more than enough. And I kept the splatter fairly light. I just wanted that little bit of texture, you know, that little bit of color. It just gives it that little extra something. So I went through and would splatter the background of each card with each color. And then I would just wipe it off the station platform and then go on to the next color, and just kind of keep rotating these until each of them had, you know, their little bit of splatter on them. And then I found that just gave it that little extra something. So I kept going through splattering each of these, and I'm wiping everything off with my little Lawn Fawn chamois, which I don't show in videos very often because more often than not I forget to get it wet. But yeah, I like it. When I do use it, I'm always reminded how much I like it. Like, you know, wiped off the ink off the stencil, no problem. And because it's that chamois material, it doesn't leave really hardly any moisture, like things dry quicker. So, and it's amazing for cleaning stamps. That's what it's meant for. But I like using it a lot for like wiping up ink and wiping off stencils and whatnot. So while I had everything out, I also pulled out some envelopes. I have said this in many videos. I love doing coordinating envelopes, but if I don't do it at the same time as I'm doing the cards, I'm not going to go back and create a coordinating envelope when it's time to mail it out. So trying to be better about doing it at the same time, and then that way I can store the envelope with the card and then mail it out, and it's all coordinating and fabulous. So I pulled out some white envelopes, and exact same process, just attaching the stencil the way I wanted it on these envelopes, and then just blending the colors on, just, you know, using kind of more the edge of the blending brushes. That way I could get, you know, all of these colors onto each envelope. Just holding it down with the magnets, blending on the color. And then after I was done all the envelopes off camera, I did end up splattering all the envelopes too. I couldn't resist. I couldn't just leave them as is. So I did splatter those same 3 Distress Oxide colors onto all of the envelopes. So then that way I've got coordinating envelopes for all of these cards, you know, everything's ready to go. And then, as always, not just the envelopes, I'm going to do the insides of the cards as well. So for all of my card bases, I have Neenah Desert Storm cardstock that I've already cut down and scored. So just 2 more pieces of cardstock that I cut in half, scored at 4 1/4. So these will all be A2 side folding cards. And then I used more of the Post-it tape to mask off right at the spine of the card where the fold line is, to mask off what will be like the front inside of the card, and then placing the stencil on the inside of the card and then blending those same inks over it. It's another reason why I love the Distress Oxides, because they have that pigment in them. They show up on darker colors of cardstock, so of course they show up on the Desert Storm cardstock just fabulously. I love it, especially the lighter colors, because if you're using regular Distress inks, the lighter colors will not show up very well. They'll kind of show up, but especially as they dry, they'll, like, the lighter colors, especially like something like Squeeze Lemonade, would dry into the cardstock, and in the end you would hardly see anything, if anything at all. But the oxides sit a little more on top of the cardstock because of that pigment, and the colors show up, which, I don't know, it's fun. So depending on what you're doing, different inks work in different ways, different preferences. I get people asking me, like, do you recommend oxides or the regular Distress inks? I can't recommend anything. One, it's, again, personal preference, but also when it comes to Distress inks, I have both and couldn't imagine, I wouldn't give up one type of ink for the other. There's no way. Room for everything. I literally make room for this stuff. So anywho, did all the insides of my cards. And then for the card fronts, I did trim them down a little bit. I trimmed off about 1/4 inch off the tops and sides. So they'll be slightly smaller than the card bases. And then I pulled out the CZ Design Like You Words stamp set. And I lined that up on my card front in my Mini Misty here. So once I had the stamps lined up, I am inking them up with VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. And then stamping that onto the card front. And then this way I can go along, stick in the next one, ink up the stamp, stamp it, and repeat this process until all 4 card fronts are stamped. So really quick and simple and easy. Love. There are coordinating dies for this stamp set. So if you wanted to, you could definitely amp it up and like die cut the sentiments and, you know, stack them, etc. and add that, and that would look really great too. But I just really liked how the black sentiment just really stood out on the paler colors and the white background and that little bit of splatter and whatnot. So I went along and stamped all of those sentiments, and then after I finish the card fronts, I want to stamp the insides of the cards. So I'm going to turn my Misty around and then line up the inside of the card with like the kind of very inside edge of the Misty. And I actually ended up pulling out my little grid transparency as well, just to make sure I had this little sentiment lined up straight. Always worth the time to make sure your sentiments are lined up, especially when you're stamping directly onto, the inside of your card or directly onto the front of your card. Something where you can't just restamp and be good to go, if it's crooked. Whereas when you're I don't worry about it when I'm stamping on, something I'm going to die cut, etc. So lined up that sentiment and then stamped it with that same VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink, and then did the exact same process, like put the inside of the next card in, lined it up with that inner edge, stamped the sentiment, and then repeated that process until all 4 card bases were stamped with that sentiment, so that all my cards say, "I really like you," and then the inside says, "So very much." So definitely cards where this just kind of works for like any occasion. This could be for birthday, it could be thank you, just saying, whatever you need to say, sort of a thing. So after I finish stamping the insides, I'm going to adhere the card bases or the card fronts to the card bases. I just use some craft tacky glue on the back of that. And again, you could leave it here. This works out as just a nice little like fun bright card set. But I had to add just a little something. So I pulled out my Nuvo Dream Drops. That's actually what inspired the paler colors rather than the bright colors I normally use. I pulled these out and I was like, oh, I really like the, the more pastel-y sort of colors these have. So I pulled out the Dream Drops and I used Cloud 9, which is the kind of iridescent white Dream Drop, and applied that to all of these card bases. And then I also added some Fairy Wings, which is kind of a iridescent pinky purple color. Very hard to translate on camera how cool these drops are. I've done videos in the past using them. They look amazing on dark cardstock too, because they're basically like interference type colors. So they look completely different on dark cardstock versus light cardstock. So that's also why I wanted to use them on these, because using them on the lighter, they're subtle, because I didn't want them to be super loud and flashy with just the paler backgrounds. And then the last one I added was the Indigo Eclipse, which is a purpley sort of dream drop. So I applied all those, and then I'm just tapping each of these card bases just on, the base of the ink pad here. The tapping just helps kind of smooth everything out, and it flattens them just a little bit so they look more like enamel dots, plus they dry faster. So after I finish tapping them, I let everything just sit and dry fully overnight, and then I can pair these with their little matching envelopes. So I've got this fun little card set with all these fun little rainbow hearts. So basically 3 pieces of cardstock, 4 cards, 4 envelopes with that 1 stencil and the 1 little stamp set. And of course my Distress Oxide inks, etc., etc. And these were really fun to make. I quite enjoyed the splattering and the ink and the pastel colors and just all that stuff. So as always, if you are interested in any of the supplies and tools and whatnot that I used, I will have links directly below the video in the description box below. If you are interested, there will be a supply list. There'll also be a link to my blog post. I always post picture links and whatnot in my blog post, so that's linked directly below as well. So you can check that out if you're interested. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you all very soon in the next video. Bye!